Story 1. I, 24 male, walked in on something horrifying with my girlfriend Laura, 23 female, and 2 friends, Jake and Shelly, 23 male and female. Please help me. I've been seeing Laura for a year. She's fantastic, and we adore one another. I've known Jake and Shelly for 2 years. We weren't close at first, but now we are. They love Laura and spend more time with her than with me. Once, they even informed me that if we split up, they would choose her side. Anyway, I'll go right to it. Laura had just graduated from college and wanted to celebrate. Let me begin by mentioning that she never drinks. I believe she's only drunk once or twice in the year I've known her, and that's because my circle of friends sort of forced her to. She can't take booze since she's so little and has no tolerance. This will come in handy later. So, Jake and Shelly invited her to their house when I was at work and I was unable to go. The idea was for them to pick her up and drive her to their apartment, then for me to pick her up after work so she wouldn't drink and drive or have to stay the night. Everything was okay. I trust them, and I know they are experienced drinkers who would keep an eye on her. I leave work at 2 a.m. and go over to their house. I knew Laura was intoxicated at this point because of the messages I was receiving from her, so I knew I had to take care of her. But then I arrived at their home and discovered something horrible. Laura is unconscious on the ground. Shelly is on top of her, making out with her, and Jake is filming everything on his phone. I panic out and ask him what the hell is going on. Then I grab his phone and erase the videos and photographs. He chuckles and claims it was all a prank, that they took the images to mock Laura and play a joke on her in the morning. I take her up from the ground, and we walk away. Guys, she was so inebriated she couldn't even walk. She was puking all the time, weeping all the time, and couldn't see straight, while my eyed mates were absolutely sober. What the heck is this? I put her to bed and then got a text from Shelly stating I shouldn't be upset since it was all a joke. I respond that they took advantage of her, and she agrees but claims they did it in a pleasant manner so she could let free and have fun since she is constantly studying. I was so horrified that I didn't respond and spent the whole night caring for Laura since she wouldn't stop vomiting. Laura gets a slew of text messages from them the following day, berating her for getting them into trouble. They claim she's an adult woman who can handle her own errors, that they don't care what I think about what they did, but I'm little and that it's all her responsibility since she forced them to make the video. If you could see how incoherent and blacked out my partner was, you realize she couldn't even get up, much alone pushed anybody to do anything. She's been sobbing all day, going back and forth between yes, it was all her fault, and no, they were filthy. They continued to chastise and ridicule me for being furious, claiming that I am overreacting to a simple prank that they were planning to perform on her. I'm at a loss on what to do. Please help. Am I mistaken? Because I don't believe I am, but Jake and Shelly are circulating tales about it, portraying me as a possessive, controlling jerk, and my girlfriend as a stupid drunk who forced them to behave poorly. Update. For many days after the event, they phoned my girlfriend repeatedly, blaming her and telling her it was her fault. She revealed to them that she was blackout drunk and couldn't remember anything, and they jumped on that knowledge by feeding her fake tales about what really occurred and accusing me of lying and being a controlling jerk who just wanted to separate her from her genuine friends. They then proceeded to tell her horrible stories about my past, that I did drugs when I was 18 for God's sake, that I was once arrested for drunk driving, a mistake I admitted to as soon as she and I met, and she was aware of it from the start, that I've slept with multiple women, and that Laura is just another number to me. Guys, I'll confess that I used to be a party animal with a horrible history, but I'm a different guy now, and I love my fiancée with all of my heart. It's done that they were using my history against me to get her to join their cause. So I advised her to go to the police station and submit a complaint, and she consented. They flipped when she told them to stop pestering her out. They came to our home late at night to attempt to speak to her. They left snacks and gifts for her on our door and even enlisted the help of her parents. Her parents are not fools, and as soon as I informed her what they did to Laura, she barred them from the home and threatened to call the cops if they returned. It was a bizarre situation given that they left handwritten messages for her parents to read, marked, "Love your beloved son and daughter." Laura spent several nights in my arms sobbing with remorse and uncertainty. After weeks of harassment, we went to the police station and filed a case. She didn't want to pursue charges. I'm working on rebuilding her self-esteem so she can do it if she ever wants to. The cops told her that she has enough evidence to bring charges against them, since she had the messages in which they acknowledged taking advantage of her, and that if she does, they can take their phones and check for their video. I'm still not sure how it would work, but I'm not going to argue with him. Laura only wanted to submit a report so that if anything were to happen in the future, there would be a paper trail. She's thinking about getting a restraining order against them, but they've stopped and gone quiet. We have lost touch with them and any other friends who believe their falsehoods. Laura is in treatment and is gradually coming to terms with the fact that she was attacked. I sometimes accompany her to encourage her. The most difficult aspect for her is not feeling like it's her responsibility. She brings up the fact that she was intoxicated and that if she hadn't been so drunk, it might all have been averted. It is not her fault. I constantly tell her, we'll see if she decides to pursue charges. I can't make her do anything she doesn't want to do, but I will back her in anything she decides. So there you have it. I'm not sure what to make of the chaos that ensued that night. I'm not sure why they went insane, leaving her letters and presents and attempting to contact her parents. Could one of you explain it to me? Now on to the next story. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. Story 2. A greedy ex-wife ends up screwing herself over. My ex and I were 3 months into separation. I kept suggesting divorce agreements, trying to find out what she would accept other than taking her back and returning to being a doormat for her. I have a good head for legal documents and understood very early that, as much as I would prefer to just burn everything down and disappear legally, it was very likely that I was going to be paying alimony and that she was entitled to a fair share of everything. But in a no-fault state with no gender references, it did mean a fair share. That meant that legally our divorce settlement wouldn't be heavily biased in her favor. So I kept trying to work with her and try to figure out how we could divide our assets. I did this every day for months. She would object to anything that put any responsibility on her, anything that left something of value out of her hands. Anytime I asked her what terms she would be okay with, she would just derail the conversation or something else. Not long into this, I realized that I would need a paper trail, so I switched to email only. Throughout all of this, I'd also recognized that a court would order spousal support, so there wasn't any point in just cutting her off financially. I wasn't a total doormat at this point, though. I had moved my direct deposit to a solo account and kept up with her weekly cash flow, and I kept paying the bills. But my final offer during this period was the heavily unfair offer of splitting the cars, one to each of us. Me taking on all the debt, including her student loans, me paying her like $3,000 to $4,000 a month for a year so that she could get her feet under her, and she gets all of our stuff. I walk away with my car, my dog, some tools, and some clothes. Still, this is a no-go. It's not good enough for her, and so we get to the meat of the story for this malicious compliance. 3 months in, I finally get her to agree to a mediator since I'm getting nowhere. She shows up to the initial meeting, the first time we've seen each other in a while, the second time since splitting. She had been staying with her sister. The mediator starts out with the rules of mediation and the agreements to sign. I sign easily. She boxes but signs. Finally, one of the relevant terms is that we agreed to not file any other legal paperwork. We would come to an agreement, and the mediator would file the final court papers on both of our behalf to get the divorce ordered. The mediator starts asking basic questions, and every question to either of us results in my ex launching into an irrelevant topic, attempting emotional manipulation of me or him. I just ignore her and direct my interactions to the mediator. The peak was when she literally crawled on top of the big table to stick her face in mine to force me to see her and engage in her ranting. The mediator called it quits at that point. He reminded her of the rules that she agreed to, gave us homework to fill out, and had scheduled the next meeting with his clerk 2 weeks out. 3 days later, I got served with a summons to court for a hearing over spousal support. The summons shows the claim my ex made that all she had received from me in 3 months was $1,130. Oh man, that wasn't true at all. Not to mention she violated the mediator's terms. I end up on a conference call with my ex and the mediator tells her that she needs to withdraw the complaint or mediation can't continue. She adamantly insists that she knows her rights, so the mediator ends his involvement, cut says refund checks minus time work so far, and exit stage left. I prepare for the court hearing. I print out 3 months of bank statements and highlight every transfer to her, every bill paid on her behalf, every ATM withdrawal by her card, also over 100 toll bills that I received from her just driving through the express lane tolls, so I get the elevated license plate female to me. All together, it was $133,000 and change. I thought to myself, you missed a couple of zeros in your complaint. My final stack of paper was rather thick, so I printed out an Excel spreadsheet summary to use as a cover sheet. I also looked up the spousal support rules again. Basically, you take the higher person's income and subtract the lower person's income. Then the person who makes more money has to pay 40% of that difference to the other person. There's a little wiggle room, but that's it, simple. She was currently getting up to 72% of my pay once you factored in her bills. This court hearing was a good thing. It wasn't as good as a mediator and having a fast resolution, but I wasn't likely to end up getting screwed here. Not to mention, I had daydreams of her finding out what lying on court documents might do. The court date rolls around. I show up to court, waiting in the hall outside the family law section. She shows up, plops herself next to me, and starts going off on me again. I try to ignore her, then to keep from engaging, I start a written transcript of her ranting using the back cover of my paperwork folder. Finally, she realized what I'm doing and ends the rant with, "Oh, I guess you're writing what I'm saying, so you can make your friends hate me. Trust me, they need no encouragement." She huffs, sits a few seats away, and is quiet the rest of the time that we waited. The court officer finally comes to get us, and we head in. The officer starts giving the legal speeches and then asks my ex if she has anything to add to the complaint. She launches into a roller coaster speech, proclaiming all of my bad faults, how mean I was to try to divorce her, and how I obviously didn't need any of the money that I made because I'm just gonna live somewhere simple and cheap anyways. Yeah, her words. Once my ex is done ranting, the court officer asked me if I have anything I'd like to add. The court officer seized my stack of paper and eyeballed that as she's talking. I hand over the stack of papers, tell the officer that the summary sheet on top should help clear up the financial points in question, and just verbally start going through all the items. At each one, my ex interrupts to give a reason why that item shouldn't count. Every single time, the officer keeps asking her to stop interrupting, but to no avail. We finally finish the list. The officer is shaking her head slightly and says, "Mr. OP, this court process is to ensure that both parties are doing the right thing. So all of this," she says, gesturing to my stack of papers, "needs to stop right now. We will garnish your paychecks for the amount specified by law and send that to her instead." I know that this is a win. I knew that it was going to be, but she didn't. She sat there all smug as we got into the calculations. I know that she was thrilled at the idea of getting a court check directly. Sure would show me. Everything wrapped up, we got the totals, signed the papers, and I handed over a check for the first payment. The officer got up to make copies of everything. I asked the officer if I could wait in another room while she got the copies, and she agreed while giving my ex a bit of a side eye. I got my paperwork first, with the officer saying it might take a few minutes for her to get her paperwork, but, "You're free to go." I got the hint and left immediately. I got in my car and immediately called my cell carrier and canceled her phone. They asked me, does she want to set up her own plan? I can't answer that. I'm hoping a court order to remove her from my accounts. Okay, they said. Then I just worked down the remaining subscriptions that I was paying for that she used. I even had all the bills in front of me from the court documents with the account numbers and customer service numbers right there. I was done and driving home when she started blowing up my phone with incoming emails demanding to know what I was doing. Then texts from her sister's phone. Then calls. I just grinned and didn't answer any of them. She stopped after an hour or so and gave me a few hours of silence. Then I got an all-caps email with a screenshot of the Netflix inactive account message. Oh my God, even Netflix. I admit it, I giggled. The fallout wasn't over, though. A month later, after she realized how much less money she got from me after winning her case, she filed an appeal. It was denied due to a lack of a reason. A month later, she filed a complaint that I wasn't paying her car payments. This was just an excuse to get into court. I had been paying it, and I was also pretty confident that even if I hadn't, she didn't know how to get into that loan account. She legally could, she just never had cared to learn how. This time I had a lawyer and we both went to court. My ex was joining by phone. The officer paused before calling my ex and tells my lawyer, "This lady is a piece of work." The validation of that statement will always remain with me. The call goes predictably. My ex makes irrelevant rants. The officer keeps shutting her down. Finally, the court officer asks my ex for proof that I wasn't making my car payments while she's holding documents proving that I had been. My ex nearly screams, "I just know that he is in so that he can hurt me." The officer replies, "I am holding proof that he has paid it and is satisfying his legal obligation. This complaint is dismissed. Thank you," and hangs up on my ex. Then, down in the comments, we had this story from Captain Cinders. My brother went through a breakup and made a generous offer to pay for his kids' upkeep. His ex decided that wasn't enough and insisted they take the legal route. My brother happily agreed because he had already worked out what they would assess his payment to be. Yep, they determined that he was overpaying. She tried to backtrack, but once the courts determined what he should pay, that's what he had to pay. Then came the divorce. My brother offers to give her the house free and clear as a home for his kids, plus child support, and he would walk away with the remaining cash to set up his new life again. This wasn't good enough for her, and she insists they go to the courts. We found out through a third party that she was boasting that she was going to take him to the cleaners. She wanted the house, half the money, and child support, and she just knew the court would rule for her. So they went to court. She even hired a lawyer to fight in her corner, who apparently looked at my brother's proposal and told the judge that he found it to be sensible and equitable. Strangely enough, the judge agreed, so the ex got the house and no cash. The story doesn't end there. As part of the settlement, they each had to declare all financial details to the court, and my brother knew that she had a secret credit card with $15,000 of debt that she didn't declare. If she had declared it, then legally the debt would have been half his, but she kept it quiet. Why? Embarrassment, we assumed. So she'll get the house and no cash. But now she has the secret debt that she can't pay off. So she panics and starts saying that she wants to claim future earnings, pensions, inheritance, etc. My brother made her an offer of $155,000, but she had to sign away all future claims to his money. She snapped it up. 2 years later, my brother inherits £500,000. She cannot claim a penny of it. So by assuming that my brother was trying to screw her, she screwed herself every step of the way. Now on to the next story. Story 3. I never thought my life would unravel in such a heartbreaking way. I went from feeling on top of the world to living a nightmare. This story took place over the course of almost 5 years. So bear with me as I try to provide a complete context. Let's go back about 5 years. It all started when I discovered the truth about my wife and my best friend's father. Let's call him Jim. Jim had divorced 4 months prior. My wife and I had been married for 14 years, and we have a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. Our marriage had its ups and downs like any other couple, and most of our problems revolved around money. We worked for the state of California, where the cost of living is very high. We live in an affluent neighborhood, not because we are wealthy, but because the neighborhood gentrified and we moved in. My house has been in the family since the 1940s, handed down from my father, who inherited it from his father. Many people have tried to convince me to sell, including my wife, but I refused because it holds sentimental value. Raising my children in an affluent neighborhood means that we are surrounded by wealthy neighbors. Our children grew up with wealthy kids, and my wife and I had comparably low incomes. We always felt like we couldn't provide the best things for our children because they wanted to keep up with what their friends had. One day, my 11-year-old son came home with an expensive handheld game console that Jim had bought him as a Christmas gift. I couldn't afford to buy it for him because other things took priority. At first, I thought he had borrowed it from his friends, but when he hadn't returned it after 2 days, I asked him about it. He told me that Jim had bought it for him after asking him what he liked the most, and he mentioned the video game. I didn't know how to feel about it, whether to thank Jim or feel bad that I couldn't buy the console for my son without ruining myself financially. The next time I saw Jim at a volleyball match where my wife usually takes my daughter, They approached him, and he thanked my wife. Jim seemed like a nice guy, tall and fit. He was older than me but appeared younger, maybe because he exercised regularly. He came to the volleyball match with his daughter, and when he saw me there, he asked about my wife. I told him she was doing well. When I went home that day, I mentioned to my wife that I had met Jim. Just mentioning his name made my wife's eyes light up. It was quite noticeable, and I wanted to know what she thought of him. It was clear that she held him in high regard, but I couldn't guess anything beyond that. When we got married, we were the attractive couple that everyone talked about, but since we had children, we strayed from our path a bit. 3 months ago, my wife started exercising and training for a marathon. She would come home and talk about dropping off our daughter at her friend's house and how she would spend hours talking about fitness with Jim. It seemed innocent, and she spoke openly about it. Her friend's daughter is friends with my daughter, so it wasn't strange for my wife to drop off and pick up my daughter from Jim's house. However, I recently noticed that she seemed more excited when she talked about Jim. I had a feeling that something wasn't right, so I started paying close attention to my wife. That's when I realized how often she took my daughter to Jim's house. Before, she used to drop her off and come back to run errands, but now she would leave my daughter there and stay home. I installed a GPS tracker in her car to see where she went after parking her car in the same place until it was time for my daughter to come home. I didn't want to ask her why she was spending hours at Jim's house with my daughter because I didn't want to seem accusatory. I intentionally brought up Jim's name in conversation, and she would get excited and talk for hours about how great he is, how intelligent, how much money and property he has. She would tell me things that made me believe she was showing off in front of him. I put on my detective glasses and searched her phone for any clues. To my surprise, I found out that she was texting him more than anyone else. They were sending heart emojis and calling each other my love. This hurt me and made me feel betrayed. It was clear that the affair had been going on for at least 7 or 8 months. Perhaps this was the reason Jim got a divorce. When I confronted her about the text, she confessed to the affair but didn't want to admit when it started. She pleaded for my forgiveness, saying it was a mistake, but I didn't believe her. We discussed what should happen to our relationship, and I told her to leave for a while so we could have space to think. The affair had lasted so long that I couldn't bear the betrayal. After kicking my wife out of the house, I told my children that my wife and I were having marriage problems but didn't mention the affair or say anything bad about their mother. The first time I realized that my wife had poisoned my daughter's mind was when my daughter started being unnecessarily rude to me. I punished her by taking away her phone, which made her even angrier. She said she would buy herself another phone, a better one. Her statement hurt me deeply, and I felt like I was losing control of my family. 2 days after my wife left, I saw on the GPS tracker that her car had been parked at Jim's house overnight. That was the death sentence for our marriage. Any hope of reconciliation vanished. I may not have money, but I have dignity, and I wouldn't allow myself to be humiliated like that because of money. There are things in life that are more important than money, like loyalty, integrity, and honesty, all of which my wife had broken. I called her and told her I was divorcing her. She showed no remorse. Instead, she sent me a text message saying she was done with me. There are no words to explain how I felt inside. I was visibly depressed and didn't eat for 3 days. I felt like a robot, just going through the motions of life. I did everything I could to take care of my children, but she destroyed everything to start anew with another man. Not only had she falsely accused me, but now she had taken my children away and gotten a restraining order against me. My family and friends told me to control myself and not do anything irrational. I focused on my work and ignored my family for months. I felt better without them in my life. After the divorce, my wife bought a new car and quit her job to become a stay-at-home mom in her new blended family. It was Jim and his 3 kids, all teenagers. I worried that my 13-year-old daughter was living in a house with 2 unrelated boys, and I felt powerless to do anything about it. For months after the divorce, I was in the best place of my life. I made new friends and went on dates. I felt that the divorce and custody arrangement favored me because I had a lot of free time, but I still felt empty inside. I missed the process of raising my children. I missed hearing their voices around the house, so I started visiting my son during his school recess. He ran to me as fast as he could and hugged me tightly. We went to the bank, and he told me everything that happened at Jim's house and all the toys and video games they played. He seemed happy and healthy and wanted to know when he could come back home. Tears filled my eyes at the realization that despite my financial insufficiency, my son still thought about coming back home, even if he had to live in Disney World. That day, I went home as a proud father, telling my son not to mention our visit to his mother or his sister, but that I would visit him at least once a week. As time went on, I visited my son at least once a week, spending a few minutes with him before he returned to class. On one of those visits, he mentioned that he had caught my daughter wiping away tears from her eyes as if she had been crying. I didn't make a big deal out of it. It could have been anything. On another occasion, he told me that he had caught my ex-wife crying several times. I asked him why she was crying, and he said she was angry as Jim had done something to her. I asked all kinds of questions that I had no idea about. When I got home, I was happy because there were problems in paradise. Pleased me to know that the only time I made her cry was when I caught her cheating. I felt better knowing that she was no longer my problem. Then one day, I received a call from an unrecognized number. When I picked up the phone, the caller hung up. This happened for several days. I decided to call the number back, but no one answered. It didn't happen again for a few days, and then the same pattern repeated. They would call, I would answer, and they would hang up. I had a feeling that it could be my daughter, so I used another phone to return the call, and indeed, my daughter answered on the other end. She immediately hung up. I knew something was wrong for her to call me. My mind wasn't sure what was going on. Not wanting to jump to conclusions, I went after her with so many questions. We planned to meet at a park to talk. As we sat on the bench, she was distant and didn't seem happy. She had changed physically and dressed well, but she didn't seem happy. I couldn't help but ask her why she hated her mother so much, why she had been like this for so long. Her demeanor changed, and then she angrily told me that she had confided in my ex-wife about what her disgusting boyfriend had done to her and that she had covered it up. I was in shock as she got up and stormed back inside, leaving me confused. It took me a few minutes to process what she had just told me, and my mind wondered what she meant by that. Not wanting to jump to conclusions, I got up and followed her, urging her to explain what she meant. She struggled but finally revealed that the person who had gotten her pregnant wasn't Jim's son, but Jim himself. Apparently, he had been buying her silence since she became friends with his daughter and ultimately got her pregnant after she moved in with him. It seemed like a calculated move from the beginning. When she found out she was 2 months pregnant, she panicked and told my ex-wife. Instead of protecting her, my ex-wife was more concerned with keeping me in the dark. My ex-wife eventually confronted Jim, but they kept it behind closed doors and convinced her to terminate the pregnancy. I immediately went to the police with my daughter, and we filed a report. Jim had already moved out of the neighborhood, but they arrested him at his new house and later on my ex-wife as well. She took a plea deal, confessed, and testified in court. She received a short 6-month sentence in probation. Jim was sentenced to 22 years in prison, and I will do everything in my power to make sure his fellow inmates know what he did. Thank you for listening to my story. If you were in a similar situation, how would you handle it? Please let me know in the comments. Now on to the next story. Story 4. My wife of 9 years wants to give our daughters up for adoption using a throwaway because I'm pretty active in some other subs and don't want this associated with my main account. My wife, 33F, and I, 35M, have been together since college and got married a little while after she graduated. When we first got together, she told me she didn't really like kids, and while I was a little disappointed, I didn't care too much about it. I didn't feel very strongly about it either way. We were very much in love, and things were perfect for a good while. Her birth control failed 6 years ago, and I told her that I would support whatever choice she made. She scheduled an abortion but backed out the day before, and we became loving and enthusiastic parents later on down the road. She decided she wanted another child, and so we had our second daughter. They are 5 and 3 years old and absolutely perfect. They are both very well behaved and ahead of the curve for kids their ages. Another thing that's worth mentioning. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. My job is very demanding, and I am out of town for week-long stretches at a time once a month and then 9 to 6 the rest of the month. I've had this schedule since we were married, basically. I make good money in the low six figures, and we've never had any kind of financial struggles. For the past few months, I've known something was up with my wife. She is obviously the primary caretaker of our daughters, but recently she's been completely hands-off when I'm at home. I don't mind spending the extra time with my daughters, taking care of them, but it's more than that. She will completely ignore them while I'm around. If they ask her for anything at all, she tells them to go ask Daddy. We'll go in our bedroom and lock the door to get away from them. I've been asking her if she's all right, and she had been insisting everything was fine until last night. After we put the kids to bed, she came to me and sat me down at the table. She started talking about fun things we had done right after we got married, what a great adventure everything had been, just generally reminiscing. She was being sweet and funny and loving, and my guard was down. She said, "Back before we had the girls, we could do anything we wanted. I wish we could go back to that." I asked her what she meant. After much prodding, she admitted that she regretted having kids. I said that there were times where I felt overwhelmed too, but that I would always love our daughters. She got quiet. She mumbled something, and I asked her to say it again. She yelled, "I don't love them," and then started sobbing. I sat there with my mouth hanging open. She composed herself and then started talking again. She was saying how she had been looking into adoption agencies and foster care. She had contacted one agency already. She was making plans to give away my children. I continued to listen, too dumbfounded to say a word, as she babbled on about how amazing it's going to be to have our lives back, how great our relationship will be when we don't have kids anymore. I didn't know what to do. I let her talk herself out, and when she went to bed, I went and got my babies, packed some things, and drove to my mother's house. I called in sick to work today. I told them I'd probably be out the rest of the week. I have a ton of missed calls, voicemails, and texts from my wife. I haven't looked at any of them. I've spent the day talking to my mom about things and keeping the girls occupied. My mom doesn't know what to do either. I'm thinking I have a couple of options. Start calling lawyers or start calling mental health professionals. Maybe both. I don't know if she's having some kind of psychotic delusion or if she's just that awful of a person. I really don't want to go back home to her now, ever. I'm thinking divorce is the best choice, but I can't take care of my kids on my own. What should my next move be? Should I try to call my wife? Edit. Additional info. She's not at home all the time with them. They go to pre-K for 6 hours a day, 4 days a week. My mom takes them pretty much every other weekend. She gets a lot of time to herself, even though it could be more. On nights when I'm home, she goes out with her friends often. Lately, when I'm home, she doesn't see the kids at all. It's still possible that she's overwhelmed, but she's not the isolated, barefoot and pregnant, chained to the stove woman you're picturing here. We've both always been pretty low libido. I would say we have sex once a week, and we try to have a date night every other week, leaving the girls with my mother. We are very affectionate towards one another. She graduated with an art degree. When we first got married, she was working as a teacher. She taught English and art in a local high school. She hated it, and she quit when she was pregnant with our first. She has a studio in our house, basically an extra bedroom with all her art stuff in it that the kids aren't allowed in. She paints when the kids are out of the house. She feels like her degree is useless but told me she wasn't interested in going back to school. We used to pay for a weekmaid service, but my wife decided she didn't want to spare the expense. I'm just looking for input right now, honestly. I feel like her response to this situation was completely out of line and nearly unbelievable, and I'm not sure I want to continue a relationship with someone who considers giving away her kids before even asking for help. She has consistently denied that anything was wrong and apparently put up a front to make me think that she wasn't struggling. Update 1. I second-guessed myself a little after the initial responses I was getting from my first post. I didn't expect anybody to side with my wife. I should have given more information from the start, but I didn't realize all that stuff would be relevant. I thought that from the fact that she was trying to adopt out our kids without my knowledge, people would realize that the issue was with her. I'm not trying to say I'm perfect by any means, but I took a lot of unwarranted criticism anyway. After I elaborated on our situation a little more, I got a ton of helpful advice and support. Thank you to everyone who commented or sent me a PM. I took a lot of the advice to heart. This update is going to be long. A lot of really crazy has happened. I'm in the process of finding a live-in nanny now, and I appreciate everyone who suggested it yesterday. I contacted a lawyer for advice and then bit the bullet and called my wife. One of my close friends lives a few houses down, so I explained the situation and had him on standby. I left my daughters with my mom and came back to the house to meet with her. She was absolutely furious. The first words out of her mouth were, "Where the have you been, you piece of..." When I got to the house, she berated me for leaving without saying a word to her or answering the phone. She accused me of cheating on her, called me a pig and an a-hole, and ranted for a good 15 minutes straight. She didn't say a word about the kids, didn't ask me where they were or if I had taken them. It's like she had forgotten they existed. I cut her off, told her where I had been, and that I had taken the girls to my mother's house. She seemed caught off guard. She asked me why. I explained to her that the way she had talked about adopting them out was not acceptable, and since she didn't care about them, I didn't think they were safe around her. She blinked and said, word for word, "Wait, you want to keep them? Don't you love me?" I lost it. I'm not proud of it, but I couldn't hold it together. It devolved into a screaming fight with me telling her she was insane and her yelling that I didn't love her. I went through the house and packed up all my valuables and personal documents with her screaming her head off at me the whole time. My friend came in to try and calm her down, but she threw a plate at him and told him to get the hell out. At this point, I called the cops. She dug her hole deeper by punching one of the cops and then biting the other. Once she was cuffed, I am now 100% certain that she's having some kind of psychotic break. She will be evaluated soon, but either way, I'm going through with a divorce. I doubt I'll have any trouble getting full custody, especially with that call to the adoption agency on her phone records. After my wife was arrested, I cleaned up the house and brought my daughters back home. They haven't asked where mommy is yet, but I don't know what to tell them when they do. I'm looking into taking a lower responsibility role at work, at least to where I'm not gone for a whole week at a time. I will still be heavily reliant on a nanny, but I can't stand the thought of my daughters not having a parent there to put them to bed every night. Edit. Growing up, my father was a schizophrenic. I'm not interested in putting my daughters through what I went through. Even if she gets treatment, it will be a constant worry for me. If she had cancer or some other illness, it wouldn't affect her love for our daughters. I wouldn't have to worry that she would murder them or abandon them or hurt them when I wasn't around. That's the difference. Edit 2. I called my mom, and she said she told my daughters that their mommy had to go on a trip for a little while. That's why they haven't asked about her so far. Update 2. It's been a good while since my last update, but things are progressing, so I figured I'd post something. My wife has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She is undergoing extensive therapy and trying to work out her legal issues as well. I'm still not sure what direction that is going to take. My wife's parents have been helping her with legal arrangements, as she refuses help from me and didn't even want to use my insurance to help with her medical bills. She ended up having to anyway, and I've been sending her parents money to help with paying what's left over. We mutually decided to go ahead with the divorce. She didn't want custody of our daughters or even visitation. I practically begged her to at least come to their birthdays and holidays, but she said no. I'm hoping that it's a symptom of her illness and that once she progresses through her treatment enough, she will change her mind, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I found a wonderful nanny who is fantastic with my daughters. According to her, they're very self-sufficient and don't need much help with keeping themselves entertained or anything really. I suspect my wife had been ignoring the girls even when I wasn't around. They've been constantly asking me when mommy is coming back, and I don't know what to tell them. I have to try really hard not to cry in front of them because I don't want them to worry about me. We've been going to family therapy together, but still haven't found a way to explain that mommy might never come back. Or she may show back up and not be nice, or she may show back up and be her old self again. My friend, the one she threw a plate at, and his wife and kids have been hanging out at my place a lot to keep us all company. He's been a godsend throughout this whole experience. He decided not to press charges against my wife for the plate thing. This will probably be my last update. The feedback I've gotten from you guys has really helped to ground me during these events. Even just getting validation that I'm not crazy helped. Thanks for everything. Now on to the next story. Story 5. I, 34F, strongly feel my husband, 37M, hasn't forgiven my past affair and no longer loves me. I've been with my husband for almost 15 years, married 11 of them, and we have 2 young boys together. The reasons for stepping outside of my marriage have nothing to do with my husband, and it has nothing to do with the way I feel about him. I cheated for my own selfish reasons that I deeply regret every single day. Some point after I turned 30, I felt bored with my life, kinda sad that I spent my 20s either in a committed relationship or raising 2 kids, ending up as just another stay-at-home mom. Also kinda bugged me. Instead of bringing this up with my husband, I instead looked for the excitement outside of my marriage. I don't think the details are that important, just that he was an acquaintance in town that we'd known for a couple of years. It lasted for around 7 months, but got physical for the last 4. My husband found out when he got suspicious of my behavior, although at the point he found out it had been over for a couple of weeks. For the next month or so, lots of arguments occurred, apologies on my part, not sleeping in the same bed, threats of divorce, telling me it was over, etc. After it boiled down, we sat down to talk it through and come to the conclusion this wasn't enough to tear us apart, that we'd get through it, and a time would come where it'd seem like a distant memory. I suggested marriage counseling, but he refused at every turn, stating, "I don't want anyone knowing my business. I don't care if it's a stranger or not." Fast forward 2 years to now, and our relationship feels completely different compared to before my affair. Our sex life took a while to get going again after the affair, but it's never been the same. It never feels passionate or as loving as it used to. He's completely stopped all forms of PDA, which even friends of ours have commented on. Little moments like cuddling on the sofa tend to happen only occasionally now, and it's never for too long before he'll move away. He puts off date night as much as possible. When sleeping in bed, he's almost always got his back turned to me, and just in general, his whole aura has changed. I don't feel like he's cold towards me, just that there's something missing. One of the things that's been bugging me this whole year is back in January, he had an endoscopy performed as he was having very bad stomach pains, which is very worrying because his dad died at 30 of bowel cancer, and stomach cancer runs in his family. I didn't even find out all this until days later, which has bugged me like crazy. Thankfully, he had ulcers and he's being treated for it. The fact that I know he's terrified anytime he gets stomach pains and panics anytime he's in a hospital, but decided to go through it all on his own really hurts me. He didn't even tell me he had stomach pains in the week leading up to him deciding to get checked out, which shows me I've lost something major inside of him. No one in our personal lives knows any of this, so I have no one to seek advice from. I'm not sure what kind of advice I'm seeking, so anything is much appreciated. Thank you. Now on to the next story. Story 6. I lied to my husband years ago. I'm not proud of this. We have been married for 10 years, and we dated for 2 years before we were married. Knew him in high school but never dated. Anyway, jump forward a few years, and we meet back up again. We get together and do the whole dating/romance stuff. During this time, at some point we have the talk about exes and stuff. He had a very vanilla life. 2 ex-girlfriends, no big deal. I told him that I had sex with 3 guys. We get married, life is good. He has a good job and makes good money. He hates his new immediate supervisor, but who doesn't? Fast forward to this December at his company's Christmas party. I go with him and sit down at our table and start talking to friends of ours who work there. He goes to get us drinks. He comes back and says, "Honey, I want you to meet Bobby as my new supervisor." I look up and stare square in the eyes of an old FWB that I had from the time I was about 19 to 21. Now, if you're doing the math, then you will take note that yes, there was overlap there. I stopped the FWB thing with him after my husband and I had been together for a while. In reality, we had only been dating about 8 weeks or so when I cut off the other, and even then, it was only a few times. We lost touch with each other after a couple of years. Well, obviously, he recognized me right away as well and immediately pulled me out of the chair and hugged me. He then sits down, starts talking and laughing, and sadly drinking. He starts telling old stories and talking about old friends and really nothing too bad. My husband is sitting there but is totally oblivious to what is going on or who this guy is. Sadly, the more he drank, The more his conversation started to stray away from friends until he decides that now would be the time to remember the time we went skinny dipping in the local lake. Obviously, they got my husband's attention. He then blurts out about making love on the hood of the car and how it warmed us up. Everybody at the table went dead silent, and my husband looked like he was going to pass out. I just got up and walked out to the car. He never spoke to me on the ride home. He didn't speak to me in the house, and finally, before we went to bed, I made him talk to me. As you can imagine, he was upset. Did I mention that he hated his new supervisor prior to this event? He went to bed, but I do not think he slept any. As I'm getting up the next day, for whatever reason, he comes to the conclusion that this wasn't one of the three, which it wasn't. Well, now he is starting to lose his shit, but calms down and goes to work. That night, I see him pull in the driveway, and he is just sitting in the car. I go out and can tell right away he is crying. He never cries, or if he does, he goes someplace I can't see, which is where he thought he was. I open the door and get him to come inside. Long story short, Bob decided to lay it all on the line and tried to act like they had a connection and even told my husband they were Eskimo brothers. Bob is an a-hole and he was back then as well. Anyway, he gets mad and tells me that I either come clean with him about everything or it was over between us. Then I start crying because I know this is going to kill him, but I know at this point I'm caught pretty much. So I let him know that there was a 1 in front of that 3. He is now a shell of his former self. He calls in sick to work all of the time when he had never done that before, and I know it's because he can't stand being there with Bob. He just basically mopes around the house, and he has not touched me physically since that night. Every single time I try, he just tells me no. Look, I get that this is deeply affecting him, and I know I was wrong, but this is over a decade in the past. We've been married this whole time, and we're very happy. I'm just afraid that he is going to either hurt himself, he's never said anything about that, but I worry, or hurt Bob, where he is just going to wither away. I'm also afraid he is going to be fired. I've suggested counseling, but he just mumbles about it. Anyone have any ideas how to snap him out of this? TLDR. Husband found out that his boss he hates was an old FWB of mine / I had hooked up in the past. Now he is pretty dependent. Update. Several things have happened since I first posted this. I decided that you guys were right about one thing. Counseling is going to have to come into play here. So I set up an appointment for us. I will ask him to go, but if he doesn't, which, when you read later, you will understand why he may not, then I'm going to go for myself. I found myself turning into a person who I did not like this weekend, so I need some help myself. By late Sunday afternoon, I guess I had just had it. He literally spent all day Saturday and up to that point all day Sunday sitting at the computer doing absolutely nothing. He would come to bed after I was asleep, and once he woke up, he went right back onto it. If I would come and try and talk to him, he would answer as quickly as he could and return to ignoring me. I tried to get him to go out with me and work in the yard or take a ride or anything, and he just mumbled. I knew he was still having emotional issues with this, but for God's sake, it has been since the middle of December. It's time to get over it and start living again. So Sunday comes around, and I try and make a nice dinner for us and figure that I'm going to try and see if he won't talk to me. He comes out, puts his food on his plate, and eats so fast that I haven't even gotten done with my salad before he is up walking back to the computer. I snapped. I walked in and unplugged the computer on him and sat down in a chair right in front of him and said that I was not giving him a choice. He was going to talk to me, and we were going to work this out. He started to get up, and I pushed him back in the chair, which I could tell aggravated him. He said that he doesn't understand why we need to talk. He just is trying to deal with things on his own, which I then tell him how he is not doing this and that he has been a miserable a-hole since the Christmas party and had ruined Christmas for both of our families because of his moping. He just mumbled about being sorry, but it was the only way he knew to deal with this. I wanted to know what this was. I already knew, but I wanted him to tell me. He just looked at me. He then said, "I can't look at you anymore," and got up and started to walk away. This is where I made a huge, giant mistake that I regretted when I did it, and I regret it now. I was so mad / hurt / emotional that I slapped him across the face. I didn't think it was that hard, but I left a red mark on his cheek. I immediately said I was sorry and then started crying. I've never seen him like this. My husband is a gentle man. He has never raised his voice to me in anger, nor has he ever done anything physical to me ever. He looked me in the eyes, and he was not the man I know or love. This was a cold, heartless person who was looking at me. He grabbed me by the shirt with his left hand, lifted me into the air, and told me that if I ever hit him again, he would not care if I was a woman or not. He would knock my teeth out. He then put me down. I was terrified, but I was also still feeling guilty because I hit him first. He turned to leave and I begged him to stay. He asked why and I told him I still loved him. Then he started to laugh. He then said, "You mean like you said you loved me, but then would turn around and go fuck Bob while I had to go home?" I didn't know what to say, but I figured him getting this off of his chest was a good thing, so I tried to let him talk. But he stopped. So I just said that I was young and confused. That did not go over well at all. However, it did have the desired effect of getting him to talk. The problem with that though was that when he talked, he knew way too many details about my time with Bob. He even once said, "Don't try and deny it because Bob will be happy to come here and confirm it." I was dumbfounded at first, but then mortified because it became very apparent that Bob told him everything, and I mean everything. Locations, times, and worst of all, things that I had done with Bob that I had not done with my husband. After letting him rant for about an hour, I decided to finally just ask, "Where do we go from here, and how can we fix this?" He said that he didn't know where we would go and did not believe this was fixable, at least in the sense that he can just forget about it. I told him that I missed being with him physically and that it was emotionally tearing me apart. He said that he was sorry if my feelings were hurt, but frankly, the thought of being with me intimately made him ill. So we argued some more about that, and finally, he admitted what I have suspected since that night. Had he known about Bob, then he would have never stayed with me. The fact that I had lied about it and hidden it from him for so many years, on top of there being 10 more men I had slept with, has caused him to view me as a liar and a bitch. This hurt me like nothing else ever has. To hear the man who I have loved with all of my heart for over 10 years to call me a bitch and mean it. He wasn't being mean intentionally, but he honestly felt that way. In his defense, where we live, the community is very religious and conservative, and yes, he grew up in that life as well. So sex outside of marriage is frowned upon in general, but casual sex is pretty much taboo around here. Anyway, I asked how we are going to deal with it again. He said he didn't know, but he was going to sleep on the couch. I went to bed and didn't sleep. I got up on Monday, and he had already left for work. He was working the first shift, so I knew he would get off at 3. I decided that I was going to confront Bob at the office today because he just pretty much wrecked my marriage. My husband got off at 3, and I waited till I saw him pull away and marched inside the office to confront Bob. I marched right into the office area and walked right past the secretary to his office. He was startled to say the least. I proceeded to rip him an a-hole for being a real dick about the entire thing and that he had effectively ruined my marriage. He told me that he didn't intend to do any harm. He thought my husband knew about him and thought the easiest way to ease the tension over something like this was to make light of it. He said that my husband has never said anything contrary to him about the situation. I told him I didn't give a damn, but he was to stop talking about us to my husband, and in fact, I told him I thought it was harassment. He said he would not say anything else to him about it. I left, still pissed because the damage is done. Here is the worst part. As I was leaving from the floor below, I could hear the catcalls from his coworkers asking me if I had come to give Bob another run and all other forms of vile, cruel things. I wanted to yell at them, but instead, I burst into tears and ran out. My God, if this is what my husband has had to go through, it is no wonder he has been the way he is. I get home and his vehicle is not there. I go inside, and taped on the TV is a letter telling me that he just can't deal with this. He is sorry for saying what he said to me and that he was very sorry for grabbing me. He said that for the next few days he is going to stay at a hotel outside of town so he can think, but that the reality of it is that he does not believe that this is something he can ever forgive or forget. He said that while we were planning on having a child this next year, that he could not see going through with that, but he understood that I'm getting to the point where I'm losing years to do this, and so I needed to think about finding someone else. I am devastated. I called him and it went to voicemail. I sent him a text asking him to call me please. He just texted back saying that talking was the last thing he wanted to do tonight, but promised to call me on Tuesday before work. He called me this morning and just told me he was going to work and that we can talk later. He calls me back at around 9:30, asking me why the hell I went to his place of employment. He said had I not done enough to humiliate him. Now he is the laughingstock of the building because everyone has been telling him I went there to fuck Bob. He said Bob denied that, but frankly he didn't believe a thing either of us had to say. He then told me not to call him, and when he contacts me next it will be to find out what lawyer I am using. I don't want this to be over. I still love him, and the fact that he is in this much pain is killing me. Now on to the next story. Story 7. Am I the a-hole for laughing in my husband's face? So I, 32, have been married to my husband, 34, for 6 years. Before we got married, he had me sign a prenup stating that our financials would always be separate, and the only thing we would share was an expense account to pay for household-related fees. The reason for this was because he was making pretty good money, and I was in graduate school, so my financial situation was pretty bad. But I signed nonetheless because I understood he wanted to protect himself. Anyway, fast forward to now, I've been out of school for about 4 years, and I make more than 3 times as much as he does. I never asked how much he makes, and he's never asked me either. Anyway, 2 weeks ago, I told him that I was thinking about buying a new car, as the one I had was really old since I had had it since my undergraduate days. He wasn't really interested and just told me to get whatever I liked. So, a week ago, I decided to make the plunge and get an Audi. I was pretty excited, as I had always wanted one. At the time, my husband was on a business trip. He got back yesterday, and I showed him my car. He was really happy for me. However, later he asked me what my monthly payments were, as the Audi was pretty new at this point. I told him that I had made the purchase in cash and that I had no monthly payments. He was taken back and asked with what money, and I answered that I made more than enough money to be able to afford it. He didn't talk after that, and I thought that was that. However, after a few hours, he came back to me and told me that he thinks we should void the prenup. This is where I might be the a-hole. I laughed in his face and asked him why I would agree to that, and his answer was that we're married and should share our financials. So I told him that we've been married for 6 years, and yet we've never shared financials, and I was fine with what we were doing. His sudden change of heart was very suspicious. He called me a bunch of names and stormed out and didn't come home. I guess he told his family about our fight, and they called to berate me and say how he supported me while I was in school. He didn't, and now I'm wondering if I was the a-hole. Edit. I knew his salary when we got together. However, he's since gotten promoted, and at first, when I used to ask, he would make comments that it was rude of me to ask how much he made, so I stopped. He's never really been interested in my career or job, and we don't bring our work home. The reason I make 3x what he makes, I made the assumption from what I knew his salary had been, is because I work as a CRNA, and he works as a software engineer. Edit 2. I didn't expect so many comments. Thanks everyone for sharing your opinions. This post has really made me question everything in my life. I think I'm going to take a leave of absence from my work to sort out my life. My husband was only my second relationship, and I guess I was too caught up in schoolwork and debt to really see that my marriage was a sham. Not blameless, which is hard to swallow. So I'm going to have a conversation with my husband and see where we go from here, if anywhere. Last edit. Since it's been a point of contention, I'm going to clear up a few things. I make $175 an hour and work between 40 to 48 hours a week. From what I know, he made about $90,000 when we got together. I'm sure it's higher now. He also works less hours. We live in a state that is not expensive, so my monthly contribution is about $1,000 to $1,200 a month. He had some property in need of protection, so he wanted to protect that, and I had debt from school. He did too, but mine was bigger. Now on to the next story. Story 8. My name's Tom, and I'm 31 years old. My ex-girlfriend, Lisa, who's 29, found me and wanted to hang out, but I ignored her after she broke my heart. Let me take you back to 2015. I met Lisa at college. We had so much in common and instantly got close. She asked me out, and it was a wonderful relationship, or so I thought. We had dreams together, sent some intimate pictures now and then, and did a lot of things together, though not anything physical yet. In 2019, around Christmas, I was planning to propose to her. I had gifts for her parents and siblings. I even got a gift for her mom, who didn't like me much. Lisa worked at the hospital, so I expected her to get off work later, by 5 p.m. She hadn't shown up at her parents' place, but I went ahead and gave everyone their gifts. When I gave her younger sister, Mary, a laptop for school, she cried and hugged me. She'd always wanted one. Her father, James, got a new barbecue grill. A bit later, Mary pulled me aside, clearly upset, and took me to her room with her father following us. She kept apologizing, and I was utterly confused. Then she showed me a pregnancy test and said it belonged to Lisa. I lost it completely and demanded to know about the affair. Mary told me it started at the beginning of 2019 while I was working long hours at my factory job. Lisa's mom was the one who introduced Lisa to the other guy in November. Lisa found out she was pregnant and begged Mary not to tell anyone. After Mary discovered the test, when I learned all this, my world crumbled. I decided to leave. Before going, I thanked Mary and James. James apologized and said he'd understand if I left. We shook hands and I said my thanks. I glanced at Lisa's mom, who I'll call Jane, and then walked out of their house without looking back. James and Mary were furious with Jane. By 7 p.m., I told my family what had happened, and they comforted me. Around 11 p.m., my phone blew up with calls and texts from Lisa claiming she could explain. I ignored her, changed my number, deleted my social media, and altered my email. I wanted closure, but not at the cost of seeing her again. Fast forward to mid-2020. A friend informed me that the guy who got Lisa pregnant had run off after learning he was the father. They were searching for him, but I couldn't care less. Last month, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Lisa begging me to talk and maybe give her another chance. I asked, "Why should I, after what you did?" She kept rambling, and I just ignored her because I didn't want to relive that pain. Lisa started gaslighting me. Her friends and Jane called me a coward for not seeing her again. I told Jane, "You've got the nerve to say that after what you did?" She kept talking, so I hung up and blocked their numbers. I told her friends what happened, and they left me alone. 3 months after posting my story, Lisa found me on Mother's Day. My mom wanted to go to Red Lobster since she loves seafood, and one of my half-sisters, Raven, joined us. As we were about to leave, I ran into Mary and Jane at Red Lobster. Mary was shocked to see me, and I prayed Lisa wasn't with them. Thankfully, she wasn't. Jane looked at me with disgust while Raven was in disbelief. Jane was stunned to see Raven for some reason, which I couldn't figure out. I was about to explode, but then I saw my mom and Raven both ready to confront Jane. I had to calm them down. Mary then asked me to talk. After a heated argument involving my mom, Jane, and Raven, Raven suggested that Mary and I talk alone. We did. Mary asked how I'd been, said she missed me, and wished I hadn't left. She told me Lisa was miserable after I left, but I said, "That's not my problem." I asked how school was going, and Mary cried, saying Lisa had broken the laptop I gave her before I left. I asked Mary why Jane hated me. Mary said it was because Jane saw me with another woman who turned out to be my sister, Raven. I laughed and told Mary that Lisa's actions were wasted since the warranty was still available until November 2022. Mary danced with joy and said she'd get the laptop fixed right after dinner. We hugged and said goodbye. The next day, I waited at the electronics store and saw Mary and James arrive. I smiled as we chatted. James loved the grill I gave him and apologized again for what happened. I told him there was nothing he could do. After the laptop was fixed, we talked for nearly an hour. They insisted on taking me to a restaurant I'd never been to as a thank you for helping Mary with the laptop. Mary apologized, saying she hoped I could forgive her and not be upset. Then my ex, Lisa, showed up. She looked worse than I imagined, like a surgery gone wrong. She tried to hug me, but I just stuck my hand out and asked, "What do you want?" Lisa apologized and begged me to take her back, saying it was a mistake. I told her, "You cheated on me for nearly a year while I worked my ass off for us. This is how you repay me." She tried to blame Jane, but I said, "You went along with it. You could have told me you weren't happy, but you didn't. It's not my problem anymore." I moved on, and you did too, for nearly a year, and then you tried to gaslight me, claiming the baby was mine when we never even got physical. Now your affair partner left you and is on child support. She asked why I was being so mean. I told her, you caused this. I wanted kids. I nearly bought a house for us, and you threw all that away. Lisa said she threw it away because Jane saw me with another woman. I laughed and called Mary over to explain that the woman was my sister, Raven. Lisa cried hard and realized I'd been faithful all along. She wished she'd never listened to Jane and said she hated her for it. Lisa begged for another chance, saying she'd do anything to fix things. I told Lisa, James, and Mary, I wish you all the best, and walked out. I told my family why I was out so long, and they were proud of me for not taking her back. My dad laughed and said, Jane wanted you gone, son, and found a stupid reason for it. You'll find a better woman next time. So yeah, thank you all for everything. I didn't think I'd run into her again, but even though I got closure, it wasn't worth seeing the two women who broke me. We have reached the end. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.